Hello class, now we come to the this will be, I believe, the fourth lecture on week 2 regarding the biblical worldview, and we're going to go over the section on the fall. So now this is going to be a pivotal one because it's going to define what went wrong in regards to the temptation. So there are a few things. One is the fact that it is what's called the covenant of representation. Somehow Adam and Eve are placed at the center of the garden. Adam has some what's called headship over the relationship, and then they are given the idea of the two trees. Now this is going to be what's called a period of probation. Adam and Eve are going to be given libre arbitrio, or free will. As persons, we to be a person requires you to be able to make your own decisions and to own the consequence of those decisions. So it's part of being personhood. So free will is inseparable from being a person. So in this case, Adam is given a commission: be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, name the animals. A woman was created, and now they were to engage in that, and their purpose was to fill the earth with the knowledge of God and to complete that work just like God completed his work of creation. Now, as we know, the narrative did not proceed that way. Then there was a period of probation, and then this probation was manifested in these two trees. So just to clarify, the two trees, one is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that is the bad tree. And then the good one is called the tree of life. So there is no apple involved there. That comes from the Greeks, especially with regards to a banquet in which an apple was thrown into the middle of the banquet by the goddess of discourse, and it was given to Zeus. And what he read that is who is the fairest of all the goddess. And of course Zeus was not stupid. He wasn't going to say who he was, and so he passed it on to Paris, and then Paris made a deal with Aphrodite, and then once that occurred, then there you have the Iliad and the Odyssey coming out of that. So what you have here is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the temptation is going to have a purpose, an agent, and an argument. So the purpose of it was to test mankind, okay, and to establish them if they passed the test. So there was if you want to call it a pop quiz, that was a matter of life and death. And it was also a true-false question. So it was a pop quiz that was a true-false question test, in which if you got it wrong, you died. If you got it right, you lived. Now, what this entailed is that God was going to test and see where their understanding was. Have they been thinking about God and his creation and who he is? Or have they sought something else and put something else in the place of God, which is called idolatry or autonomy? And then you have an agent, and the agent is going to be the serpent. In this case, later on it will be disclosed that that was Satan. Now, don't blame the messenger. Don't blame the serpent. Don't make a big deal because it was a serpent that is talking to a naked woman. Those are interesting things, but they are to be put aside. The agent is going to bring forth an argument, and don't blame the agent for the communication he is bringing. The responsibility to answer that is given to Adam and Eve. And so, and I like to state this at this point. I am a teacher. I impart tests, and what my tests do is that they reveal where a student has been in the course. So a week from today, you will have on the at the end of the second week, you will have a test. Now, what the test is going to reveal to me is whether, and to you, is whether or not you have been passing the class and understanding the content. If you fail the test, it doesn't mean that I fail you and then somehow I take the blame for it. If you fail the test, what that reveals is that you had already been failing the class, and now it became manifested that is the case. So it is the same thing in this context. It is not the agent, the serpent, that fails them. It is them that fail themselves, and that they have lost sight of what to think about. So now there is an argument being given. God said, the day you eat of it, you will surely die. So there is a consequence there that will be infallible and it will occur. And the serpent says, "You shall not surely die." Now that is a complete contradiction of the first statement. God says, "The day you eat of it, you'll surely die." And then the serpent says, "You shall not surely die." That's a conclusion. And then he's going to give reasons or premises, reasons for in support of that conclusion. And the reason that the serpent gives is, "For the day you eat of it, you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Now, at this point, you have to, as a rational being, analyze what that entails. The serpent is saying, one, that you will not die, but how do I know that? Because the day you eat of it, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So here is where the content question is being asked. Can human beings be like God, and what would that mean? You will be like God, knowing good and evil. Those are two distinct things. So one is human beings will be like God. Can human beings, which are finite, temporal, and changeable, created at one point, be as that which has been uncreated, who is unchanging, and who is infinite? That seems like a very easy answer, and that is no. The thing that had a beginning, a human being that was created, cannot be the same thing as the thing that has no beginning. The thing that is limited cannot be the same as that which is unlimited. So at that point, Adam and Eve should have been able to reason and say, "What in the world are you talking about? The finite can never be like the infinite. This is incoherent." And then furthermore, you have the further clarification, which says, "They'll be like God, knowing good and evil." Now, the question is, do human beings know good and evil the way God knows good and evil? So God knows good and evil by determining the nature of things. So he makes them what they are, and then that which is according to the nature of that being is good, and that which is contrary to the nature of that being is bad or destructive. So that means the way the horse is made is very distinct from the way the rabbit is made. If you treat a horse like you treat a rabbit and give them to eat the amount of food and the kind of shelter, the cage or so for a rabbit, a horse will not last long. The same thing with vice versa, with treating a rabbit as if it was a horse. And think of all the things that we are bound by. Electric devices like phones, when exposed to water without being waterproof, will necessarily damage them. And so there are natures, and acts contrary to the nature of the thing will damage that thing. And things according to the nature of that thing, if you change your oil in your vehicle within 6,000 miles for synthetic oil, and take good care of checkups and so on, then it will last you longer. It will be a better vehicle for you doing that. If you do not, then that is contrary to it. So human beings come to know good and evil by discovery. I come to realize what is good for my diet, what is good for my exercise, what is good for my muscles, what is good for all these things that I'm entrusted with. And that which is evil is also displayed by our process of discovery. So Adam and Eve could have known, should have known, and then they failed this test, this true and false test, and they failed to answer it. And what that means is that they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because they were already misunderstanding the nature of God. Now let's look at sin. There are 5 senses of sin that I'll give you, one being the more basic and more important one, and then he continues on. Sin is, and from general revelation, from what can be known, is an act contrary to the nature of a being. So for a human being who is a rational being, an act contrary to rational being is the failure to use reason to the fullest, to understand and make sense. So that is how it can be known a human being that committed murder or theft or undermined the dignity of another is not thinking properly. And so that is the root of the problem. You can also call it root sin, because out of that one you will have the manifestation of other sins. Then from special revelation, sin has been defined as no one seeks, no one understands, no one does what is right. And so this is connected with what Adam and Eve were doing. They were not seeking God. Rather than seeking to know God, they began to find pleasure in each other and disregarding this, and we get that from the text. Adam was right there with Eve, and he had no regard for what the question was being asked of her. He did not intercede in it. He was not way out there doing his own work while she was being slothful. So women, do not take it and do not take blame for this. Eve was not the one who ate of the tree primarily. It was both of them, and he was right there with her. That's what the text says. Then you have what's called autonomy. Autonomos. Auto means self, and nomos means law. And so you try to become a law unto yourself and to determine what is good and evil for yourself. So these things have a progression, and it builds up to the point where you become now the determiner of good and evil. And then you have unbelief, which is a lack of understanding, failure to understand as we should. And then out of that, then you have disobedience. So they ate because they saw that it was pleasing to the eye and desirable for food. And because they didn't understand what it meant, they went ahead and ate it. So out of that, then you have a fivefold definition of sin to help you with. It is not just doing what God told you not to do. It is far more than that. So you have to engage your mind and see what's in the text and what we know of humanity from the creation and from the world. Then you have death. And death is spoken of in two kinds. There is physical death, and which is the natural process of decay and passing away. And then there is what's called spiritual death, which is the process of the inherent consequences from sinning. If you fail to use your mind, the natural consequence from that is a failure to understand the world. If you don't understand the world, the natural consequence, you will experience meaninglessness. Meaninglessness leads to boredom, and that's one of the worst conditions that one can be in. It's so irksome, so unbearable. We're willing to do almost anything to get out of boredom, and then we go into excess, and then the excess that we go into is going to incur guilt in ourselves, and then because of that guilt, then we're going to go into meaninglessness again, and boredom and guilt, and it's just like an unending cycle. And then last of all, you have the question of theodicy. The question of theodicy has to do with a solution to the problem of evil. The problem of evil is, if God is infinite in power, he can do anything he wants. If God is infinite in goodness, he would create a world without evil. So if God is able to abstain from any evil or from seeing any evil come to pass, and he wants to not have any evil because he's good, then why is that evil? You can't say that he lacks power because he's infinite in power, and you can't say he lacks goodness because he's infinite in goodness. So he is both willing, infinite in goodness, and able, infinite in power, but yet that is evil. How do you make sense of this puzzle in reality? And that is the problem of theodicy, or the problem of evil, that has plagued many theists, and it is still one of the main reasons why many people do not tend to come to belief, because they look at the world around them and say, how can you look at the world and then give credit to God? Why don't you just blame him for the utter mess that is? And so point 5 has to do with the solution to the problem of evil, which is something that we do not quite examine in this course, but it is something that is worth bringing to your attention, and know that it is there, and it is something that Job will have to wrestle with, and other characters in the narrative, and it is a question that is there for all of us as we experience life. Okay, I want to do a lecture on redemption after this, and I hope you guys are keeping track of things. Bye.